Welcome to Unmasking the Dark Side. I'm Sierra, your guide into the darkest corners of true crime, cults, conspiracy theories, and more. So, let's dim the lights and see what lurks in the shadows. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. Today we are discussing what is probably the most popular cryptid out there, Bigfoot. Some people believe that the legend is nothing more than a hoax. And some people believe every detail, but most people fall somewhere in between. But regardless of what you believe, you've probably heard the stories and you've probably heard the names. Though what many people aren't aware of is that the origins of Bigfoot run much deeper than a few photographs or some alleged footprints. The story stretches way back before the creature was ever even called Bigfoot. So, let's get into it. One of the biggest misconceptions surrounding Bigfoot is that the story began with a single sighting or single legend. But in reality, the modern story of Bigfoot is actually three separate stories that over time gradually kind of morphed into one story. And another misconception is that Sasquatch and Bigfoot are used interchangeably to refer to the same creature. But stories of Sasquatch predate stories of Bigfoot by a long shot, meaning that Bigfoot and Sasquatch are not the same creature. So let's break down the origins of both of them. The term Sasquatch first became popular sometime in the 1920s. The word comes from the Sistali's First Nation people who utilized the Hulkamalum language. They inhabited what is now southwestern British Columbia long before Europeans ever even came to the area. They told the story of Sasquatch, a benevolent protector and caretaker of their land. The Sasquatch was not a single entity. There were many of them, and they were described as being shapeshifters. They were able to transform themselves into animals and also rocks and trees, allowing them to hide. Now, this story is widely regarded as the origination of Sasquatch. However, there are other variations coming from many different indigenous tribes. For example, the Coast Salish had a story about beings who protected the forest from excessive exploitation of natural resources. This was referred to Sasquatch, or translating to wild man. The Ojibwe followed a sacred law of honesty called Sabe, and this was used as a reminder to remain true to one's self. The last one I'm going to bring up in this video is the Kwakwaka'wakw. They had a legend that warned young children from wandering far into the forests by themselves. This is called Zunukwa, or the Wild Woman of the Woods. In this story, the Zunukwa would mimic the voice of a child's grandmother to lure kids into the rainforest. The woman is said to target lazy or misbehaving children, reaching out her huge, hairy arm to snatch the children up. She would then force thick, sticky tree sap into the kids' eyes, temporarily blinding them, preventing them from escaping. She would then place them in a huge, massive basket strapped to her back, with the intent of taking them back to her home to cook and eat them. There are several other stories of Sasquatch that I came across during my research. However, I didn't want this video to be too long. Plus, these stories are considered to be the most popular and the most noble. For centuries, these stories stayed mostly within the communities that told them. But in the late 1950s, this would take a dramatic change. A handful of mysterious events deep in the forests of Northern California would thrust the legend into the spotlight, capturing the imagination of the American public. The events ignited a mystery that quickly spread all around the world. The stories continue to pull people in to this day, introducing the world to a name that has become synonymous with the mystery: Bigfoot. This story begins in a remote section of Northern California called Bluff Creek, an area thick with forests. In the summer of 1958, a logging company called Pacific Lumber Company was working on building roads in the wilderness when the workers noticed something strange. Overnight, human-like footprints appeared in the mud around the construction site. The prints were much larger than an average human foot. Some of the prints were as big as 16 inches in length. So to put that into perspective, the average man wears a size US 10.5 shoe, meaning that their feet are 10 to 11 inches in length. A foot that is 16 inches in length is the equivalent to a men's-size US 23 shoe. For even more perspective, NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal wears a size 22 shoe. Also, the average width of a human foot is about 3.5 to 4.5 inches. The width of the Bluff Creek prints were 6 to 8 inches in width, and while they were human-like, they were very blocky. Even the tallest man in recorded history, Robert Wadlow, could not pull off something like this. His shoes and feet were huge. Robert Wadlow wore a size 32 AA, meaning that as long as his feet were still very narrow and very still human in structure. The prints discovered at Bluff Creek tells a completely different story. Interestingly enough, the prints were not just a single incident. According to the logging crew, the prints would reappear again and again around the work sites. Always huge, always human-like, and always appearing in areas recently disturbed by rain or construction work. It was during this period that Jerry Crew decided to preserve what the crew were seeing. So, using plaster, he created molds of the footprints, capturing the shapes into hardened casts before they could fade back into the forest floor. Photographs of Jerry along with the molds were photographed and shared around, and one of these images actually even was published in a local newspaper. That image changed everything. The story was no longer just some rumors from a logging site. It was a visual record that could be shown, shared, and questioned. The newspaper story gave the unknown track maker a name, Bigfoot, referring to the size of the footprints. And with that, the story and the mystery left the forest and entered the public eye. With the story now circulating in newspapers, the mystery of Bigfoot quickly divided public opinion. For some, the evidence was compelling. Prints showing up time and time again, physical evidence with the plaster casts, and multiple eyewitness accounts. This was enough for some people, because these details suggested something simple but extraordinary, that an unknown creature was walking around and possibly living in the forests of California. But others were less than convinced. Skeptics pointed out that the evidence could be explained without introducing an unknown creature. So I'd like to go over both sides of the story, starting with the believers. The believers' case starts with the footprints themselves. According to the workers, these were not isolated discoveries. The tracks were repeatedly found around the work sites. The prints were reported to be generally similar in size. While some were clearer than others, reports typically reported them as being around 16 inches long, 6 inches wide, and human-like in shape with 5 toes, and they appeared in a walking gait rather than a few random prints. A walking gait just refers to patterns or styles of how something walks. It includes things like stride length, the spacing between the left and right footsteps, the angle the feet point, and the rhythm and sequence of the steps, and also how weight is distributed as each foot touches the ground. In this case, people also looked into the step pattern, depth of the prints, and the direction of travel. Believers are positive that the tracks looked to have been made by a single heavy creature walking naturally. And they also claim that the stride length and the consistent pattern would have been very difficult to imitate over long distances and make it seem legit. Skeptics pointed out that the uneven ground could affect stride length and footprint shape. And they also argued that someone could in fact imitate the footprints somewhat easily, for example using carved wooden feet or perhaps a costume. They also posited that if a person really was determined enough, they could intentionally create a realistic set of footprints, and not just some random prints. Another point brought up by the skeptics is that things like wind, erosion, rain, and the angle of a step taken could potentially distort footprints, especially in areas with lots of human interaction, just like the sites where the loggers saw the prints. And also, not every footprint was examined with the same scientific precision, not to mention that some of the prints were clearer and deeper than others. To piggyback on this point, Different casts and photographs do show slight variations in the size and shape of some of the prints. For a while, the Bluff Creek footprints remained at the center of the mystery, but eventually the activity began to quiet. The footprints stopped appearing as frequently. For a time, the story of Bigfoot faded into rumor, but the legend was not done growing. Almost a decade would pass when something would happen that would pull Bigfoot right back into the spotlight and reshape the story in a matter of seconds. The date is October 20th, 1967. Two friends and experienced outdoorsmen, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, are horseback riding near Bluff Creek, the same remote area where a decade earlier unusual oversized footprints were found. Patterson is carrying a 16mm camera. According to him, the goal that day was simple: search for evidence of the large, unidentified creature that locals talked about for years. As they moved through the forest, the men claimed later that they rounded a bend and saw something neither of them ever expected. Patterson dismounted his horse in shock at what he was seeing. Camera in hand, he began to film. The resulting footage lasts just under a minute. Both in that small window of time, it captures something that would become one of the most debated and iconic images in cryptid history. The film runs for 59 seconds, beginning with Patterson already filming. At a distance of roughly 120 to 150 feet away, a large, dark, hair-covered creature walks across a gravel sandbar, moving from left to right. The figure walks upright on two legs, with its arms naturally swinging at its sides, moving deliberately and fluidly. After taking several steps, the figure slightly turns toward the camera, offering a profile of a possible broad and flat face, complete with a pronounced brow ridge. Then it turns away and walks into the trees. The camera rolls for just a few seconds more, showing the now empty landscape. This footage spread like wildfire far beyond Northern California. The creature would be even given a name: Patty. To believers, the film was unlike anything that had come before it, but skeptics saw something completely different. So, let's get into it. The believers first pointed to the creature's proportions: a heavy build with long arms and a fluid and natural way of walking. They posited that it did not seem to resemble a human in a costume, especially given the terrain that it was moving across. It is also believed that muscle movement can be seen underneath all the hair, particularly in the shoulders and the thighs. Researchers who have analyzed this footage concluded that its stride and walking pattern differ from that of a human. Over the decades, digital enhancement and other studies have fueled the debate. Critics argued the opposite, saying that the film is too blurry and too short to be able to determine exactly what is being shown. Most people simply believe that the figure is simply a person wearing a gorilla suit, with many noting that no body, bones, or DNA have ever been discovered to support the existence of a Bigfoot-like creature. Several individuals have claimed to either have been the person in a gorilla suit or have helped to put the film together. However, none of these claims have ever been conclusively verified. Whether authentic or not, the Patterson-Gimlin film changed everything, because before 1967, Bigfoot was simply just a local legend known in some parts of the Pacific Northwest. After the film, Bigfoot transformed into a worldwide phenomenon. Even today, more than half a century later, nearly every discussion about Bigfoot circles back to those 59 seconds of film captured in the California wilderness. At the end of the day, every Bigfoot story falls into one of three categories: hoax, myth, or misidentification. So, when we strip all that away, the noise, the hoax, the hype, what exactly are we left with? stories that go back for generations, footprints in places where they shouldn't be, and an encounter that two people swear they saw something real. But what keeps the legend alive isn't just evidence. It's us. Human curiosity and storytelling, even when the facts don't necessarily support it. And maybe that's because we want it to be real. Or maybe, just maybe, somewhere deep in the forest, something is still watching from a distance. Bigfoot may never make its way from the forest into certainty. But as long as there are unanswered questions, people will still continue to look for him. And until we have undeniable proof either way, the question remains open. As long as the forest stays wild and the nights stay dark, the legend of Bigfoot will keep on walking ahead of us, just out of reach. The story may end here, but the questions do not. So, stay curious, stay cautious, and I'll see you in the shadows.